My name is Eleonora Vance. I turned 32 last spring, and for as long as I can remember, I've known my exact place in my family's solar system, a distant, quiet planet orbiting a much brighter star. That star was my sister, Isabella. Older by 3 years, Isabella was the golden child, the one who effortlessly collected all the smiles, all the praise, all the second helpings at dinner. She got the bigger bedroom with the better view. She did everything right, at least according to the unwritten, yet strictly enforced, rulebook of our parents, Carol and Robert. Her life was a masterclass in meeting their expectations. She married her high school sweetheart at 24, had 2 perfect boys, Leo and Max, by 27, baked casseroles from scratch that looked like they belonged in a magazine, and had her Christmas cards, complete with a professionally shot family photo, in the mail by September. She was their masterpiece. And me? I was the quiet, off-brand sequel. I stayed single, pouring my energy into my career. I rented a peaceful, meticulously organized apartment across town, a sanctuary where no one asked me why I still hadn't settled down. My life was built on a different kind of foundation, a healthy 401k, a maxed-out Roth IRA, and a fierce, unwavering intention of never having to ask anyone for help. Apparently, in my parents' eyes, a solid financial portfolio just doesn't have the same shine as a diamond ring. They never said it outright, of course. My parents were masters of subtle disapproval. But their questions always carried a heavy, pointed weight, designed to remind me of my deficiencies. "Don't you want children before it's too late, honey?" my mother would ask, her voice laced with feigned concern. "Your sister's boys are growing up so fast. It's such a shame they don't have any cousins to play with." Or my father would chime in, "You're still in that little apartment, huh?" I learned early on to simply nod, smile vaguely, and change the subject. For years, I harbored a secret, foolish hope. I used to think that if I just worked hard enough, if I became successful enough, if I was responsible enough, maybe one day they'd finally see me. Not as a problem to be solved or a project to be completed, but as a daughter they could be proud of, the way they were so effortlessly proud of Isabella. But that truth, the real truth, settled in slowly, like dust on shelves you eventually stop noticing. I wasn't the daughter they bragged about at dinner parties. I was the one they simply assumed would be fine, no matter what. The reliable one. The backup plan. Still, I never complained. I played my part. I visited on holidays, bringing expensive wine they forgot to thank me for. I was their on-call IT support, patiently fixing their Wi-Fi and resetting their passwords. I remembered their birthdays, even when they consistently forgot mine. For the most part, I kept my distance. It felt safer that way, living in the quiet orbit I had been assigned. I didn't know back then that no amount of distance would be enough. I didn't know that one day, they would try to pull me into their chaotic gravitational field so tightly that I would barely recognize myself in the wreckage. Isabella's picture-perfect life began to come apart the way fine china does, with a hairline crack you can't see at first, and then, all at once, a catastrophic shatter. Her husband, Mark, a man our parents adored, had been cheating on her for years. She found the messages by accident, a phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter. Or maybe, after years of willful ignorance, she was finally ready to stop pretending. She didn't see what was so obviously there. When she filed for divorce, no one blamed her, not even our parents. Mark, the charming man who had been the centerpiece of their family vision, simply vanished. No child support, no apology, just a ghost who left behind a mountain of debt and 2 confused little boys. Isabella was left completely adrift, with 2 sons, Ethan and Jamie, and a stack of bills she couldn't possibly carry alone. Our parents were supportive, of course, but only in words. Their savings, they explained, were tied up in their retirement and various illiquid investments. So, Isabella, the golden child, moved from her sprawling suburban home into a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment where the boys had to share a room and the floral wallpaper was peeling in the corners. The sight of her, so broken and lost, stirred something in me. I didn't think twice. I paid her attorney's retainer fee, a sum that made me wince, but I paid it without comment. When her part-time hours at the local community center weren't enough to cover the bills, I quietly covered 6 months of her rent. I even took the kids for a few weekends, filling my quiet apartment with the chaotic energy of 2 young boys, just so she could have a moment to breathe, to remember who she was outside of being a single mother. I never brought it up. I never kept a tally or expected anything in return. I adored my nephews, and Isabella, for all her past glory and unearned praise, looked utterly broken. She looked like someone who had never had to ask for help in her life and hated every second of needing it now. A small, naive part of me thought, maybe now our parents would see the truth. Maybe this time, they'd finally understand that I wasn't the one who had something to prove. They didn't. Instead, every single conversation with my mother began with a lengthy, dramatic update on Isabella's pain and suffering, which was always, inevitably, followed by the question, "So, are you seeing anyone yet, Eleonora?" I kept quiet. I continued to help where I could. I told myself that this is what family meant. It meant showing up, even when you were exhausted from being invisible. But the thing about always being the responsible one, the one who never says no, is that eventually, people stop seeing your help as a gift. They start seeing it as a given. And they start to believe it's something they are entitled to. It was a Wednesday when my mother called, her voice buzzing with a brightness I hadn't heard in months, maybe even years. "Eleonora, honey, we have such wonderful news. Can you come by for dinner tonight?" For a fleeting, hopeful second, my mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe Mark had resurfaced. Maybe the courts had finally tracked him down and enforced the child support payments. Maybe Isabella's life had finally, miraculously, turned a corner. Is it about the boys? Did they get the child support? I asked, a genuine flicker of hope in my chest. No, something even better, she chirped, her cheerfulness feeling slightly forced. Just come over. Your father's already home, and Isabella will be here, too. I drove across town after a long day at work, feeling tired, but my curiosity was piqued. There was something off about her tone, something too smooth, too rehearsed. But I chided myself for being cynical. Maybe, just this once, it really was good news. When I walked into my parents' living room, the scene was already set, like a play waiting for its final actor. Dad was in his usual recliner. Mom was perched on the very edge of the couch, vibrating with nervous energy. And next to her was Isabella, who offered me a small, tight, nervous smile. On the coffee table, placed squarely in the center of the room, sat a thick manila folder. It seemed to pulse with a strange significance. "There she is," Dad said, hoisting himself out of his chair to give me an awkward hug. He immediately picked up the folder and handed it to me. "Take a look at this." Confused, I opened it. Inside was a thick stack of documents, heavy with dense legal language and the logos of real estate companies. At the very top, in bold letters, were the words, "Mortgage Agreement." "What is this?" I asked, my eyes scanning the dizzying numbers. "It's for Isabella's new house," my mother beamed, her smile so wide it looked painful. "We used most of our savings and took a little out of our retirement for the down payment. Isn't it wonderful?" I blinked, trying to process the information. You bought a house?" "Yes," she said, clapping her hands together. "A lovely place. 3 bedrooms, a big yard for the boys to play in. They need stability, Eleonora. This depressing little apartment just isn't enough for them." I looked over at Isabella, who just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes fixed on her lap. That's great," I said, and I meant it. "The boys will love that." I started to hand the folder back to my dad, but my mom pushed it back toward me. No, honey, those are for you." A cold, creeping dread began to snake its way up my spine. "What do you mean, they're for me?" My father cleared his throat, taking on the official, patriarchal tone he used when he was about to lay down the law. "We've talked about this as a family, and we've decided that you'll be the one to take over the mortgage." The room went completely silent. I could feel all 3 pairs of eyes on me, waiting, expecting. "You've been saving for years," he continued, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "You're in a good financial position. You can make the payments easily." "Isabella can't afford it," my mother added, her voice softening into a gentle, manipulative caress. "She's doing everything she can, but the boys need this house. They need this stability." I stared at them, the folder feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. "You're asking me to pay for Isabella's house?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Isabella still wouldn't meet my eyes. "After Mark left? I have nothing," she murmured to the floor. "I can't give the boys what they need without help." I looked down at the mortgage agreement again. The monthly payment was staggering. It was more than my own rent. "I already paid for your divorce," I said softly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "And half a year of your rent. I've been saving for 10 years to buy a home of my own." "Sweetheart," my mother said, reaching for my hand, her touch feeling like a brand. "We raised you. We've done so much for you. Isn't it time you started to give back?" That was it. That was the line. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. "You bought a house you knew she couldn't afford because you just assumed I would cover it," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't realized was there. My father didn't even have the decency to deny it. "You don't have a husband or children to support, Eleonora," he said flatly, as if that explained everything. "I'm not doing this," I said, my voice gaining strength. "This isn't help. This is exploitation." I left the folder on the table, unopened. And I walked out of that house before I started screaming. I told myself they'd cool down. I told myself that once the initial disappointment wore off, they'd realize how utterly absurd, how completely unhinged their demand was. Surely, asking your unmarried, childless daughter to single-handedly finance her sister's new house wasn't something most people in the world would defend. I was wrong. So profoundly, devastatingly wrong. The first volley in their campaign came the following Saturday. The call was from my cousin, Jessica, someone I hadn't seen in person since our grandfather's funeral 3 years ago. Eleonora? It's Jessica, she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. There was no hello, no how are you. Your mom told me what happened. I can't believe you're being so cold. I gripped the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. Excuse me? Isabella is a single mom, Eleonora. Those boys are your nephews. You're sitting on all that money and you won't even help your own family. Jessica, you don't know the full story, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I know enough, she snapped. Family helps family. That's what we do. Before I could even formulate a response, she delivered the final, sanctimonious blow. Isabella would do the same for you, you know. A bitter, involuntary laugh escaped my lips. No, I said quietly. No, she wouldn't. You're unbelievable, she spat, and then the line went dead. After that, the floodgates opened. The text started, then the voicemails, a relentless barrage of judgment from people I barely knew. Uncle Mike, a cousin from my dad's side I hadn't spoken to in a decade, all piling on, all reciting the same script my parents had clearly fed them. The messages blurred into a single, monotonous chant of my failings. You're selfish. They raised you. She has children. You don't. What struck me most wasn't their anger. It was their absolute, unshakable certainty. As if they knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was the one in the wrong. That because I hadn't built a life that mirrored theirs, because I hadn't produced a husband and children, my resources, my savings, my entire future was now fair game to fund someone else's. The worst of it came from my Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister. She called during dinner, her voice a syrupy sweet poison she had perfected over a lifetime. I just want to talk some sense into you, dear, she began. You're not getting any younger, Eleonora. Who knows if you'll ever have children of your own? At least this way, you'd be contributing to your family's future. The audacity of it stole my breath. So, because I'm single, I said, my voice dangerously calm, I owe my sister a house. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she clucked. They need help, and you, well, you're in a position to give it. That night, I did something I never thought I would do. One by one, I went through my phone and blocked every number that had chimed in with their unsolicited, cruel judgment. If they couldn't respect my boundaries, they no longer deserved access to my peace. And as I did, a cold, hard realization settled in my gut, a truth I had been trying to avoid. This was never about the house. This was a punishment. A punishment for not being the daughter they wanted me to be. 2 months passed in a cocoon of blessed, deliberate silence. I didn't hear from my parents, from Isabella, or from any other member of the family I hadn't already blocked. The quiet was jarring at first, then it slowly blossomed into something that felt remarkably like peace. I poured myself into my work, took long walks in the mornings, and began to reclaim the mental space that my family's drama had occupied for so long. Then the envelope arrived. It came on a Thursday, a thick, official-looking thing that I initially mistook for boring insurance paperwork. But when I tore it open, my stomach plummeted to the floor. They were suing me. Linda and Robert Vance, my own parents, had filed a formal civil claim against me in a court of law. They were demanding the sum of $350,000. I read the document twice, then a third time, my hands trembling. It was a formal demand for reimbursement for expenses related to Eleonora Vance's upbringing. Each line was colder and more absurd than the last. They had itemized everything: food, clothing, education. They had even included a section brazenly titled "Emotional Support During Adolescence," a phrase so ludicrous I couldn't read it without a burst of dark, hysterical laughter. They had tried to calculate the cost of family vacations we took when I was 6 years old. And then, at the very end of the document, was the undisguised purpose of this legal assault, written in plain, unmistakable language: funds to be used to complete the mortgage on the property purchased for Isabella Vance and her minor children. They weren't even trying to be subtle. They didn't even pretend this was about principle. It was a legal bludgeon, designed to force me to do what they wanted. I called the best lawyer I could find. Sarah Chin met with me the next day. She was sharp, wore minimalist glasses, and spoke with the calm, unflappable demeanor of someone who had seen far worse. She didn't blink once as I laid out the entire sordid story. They have no legal right to your money, she said flatly, flipping through the packet of legal documents my parents had sent. Parents are legally obligated to provide for their minor children. There is no legal expectation of repayment for a standard upbringing. So why sue me? I asked, my voice still numb with shock. Sarah shrugged, a gesture of weary pragmatism. It's a pressure tactic. A very aggressive one. They think you'll give in just to avoid the embarrassment of a public court battle. Or, she added, looking me straight in the eye, they are so deep in their own delusion that they genuinely believe you owe them. I felt numb, then a hot flash of anger, then a wave of shame for feeling either of those things. Over the next 3 weeks, at Sarah's direction, I gathered my ammunition. I gathered everything. Proof of the $7,200 I'd paid for Isabella's rent. The canceled check for $5,500 made out to her divorce attorney. I unearthed years of bank transfers to my parents, small amounts here and there, $500 here, $1,000 there, always accompanied by texts from my mother asking for just a little help when my dad's pension fell short that month. I found receipts I didn't even remember keeping, pulled records from old, dormant email accounts. Every line item was a memory I had never asked to revisit, a paper trail of my quiet, unacknowledged support. When the court date finally arrived, I wore gray slacks and a simple blouse. The only family who came to support me were my grandparents, Arthur and Margaret. They showed up in quiet, steely defiance of their own daughter. As we waited, Grandma Margaret squeezed my hand. "What they're doing isn't right, Eleonora," she whispered, her voice fierce. "But you already know that." Across the aisle, my parents sat with Isabella between them, a united front of entitlement. She looked anywhere but at me. I told myself to breathe. I told myself not to hope for an apology or a moment of clarity from them. This wasn't about changing their minds anymore. This was about proving that mine still mattered. The courtroom was colder than it should have been in the middle of summer, a beige, sterile box designed to be devoid of emotion. The carpet was thin and worn, the chairs a hard, unyielding plastic. As if they were specifically built to punish those forced to wait. My parents sat on the left, with Isabella positioned between them like a fragile prize. Behind them, a gallery of enablers, aunts, uncles, cousins who hadn't sent me a birthday card in years were now present as a show of family support. On my side, there were just two people, my grandpa Arthur and my grandma Margaret. She wore a silver brooch I hadn't seen since I was a child, a small, defiant sparkle in the dim room. When she leaned over to squeeze my hand one last time before things began, I felt a lump form in my throat and almost broke. Then the judge walked in. He looked to be in his 60s, with graying temples and glasses perched low on his nose. He had the weary, patient look of a man who had already heard every conceivable lie the world had to offer. My father, Robert, stood first, his voice filled with a practiced, self-righteous gravity. "Your Honor," he began, "we're not unreasonable people. But we invested our lives, our money, and our time into raising Eleonora. We are only asking for a small portion of that investment back, to help our other daughter and her children in their time of need." The judge didn't blink. He flipped a page in the file in front of him. "Specifically," he said, his voice dry, "what did you spend on the defendant's college education after she turned 18? My parents exchanged a quick, panicked glance. My father cleared his throat. "Well, Your Honor, at that time, Isabella had just gotten married. We were helping her and her husband get established with their first home." The judge's eyes flicked up from the page. "So, to be clear," he clarified, his tone dangerously neutral, "you did not contribute to the defendant's college expenses?" "No," my mother said quickly, jumping in. "But my mother, Eleonora's grandmother, did. And since she's my mother, I would argue that we supported her indirectly through my family." From the bench directly behind me, Grandma Margaret let out the faintest, most elegant scoff. Sarah, my lawyer, rose, calm and methodical. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Ms. Vance has been entirely financially independent since the age of 18. Furthermore, she has provided repeated, significant financial support to both her parents and her sister over the years." She handed over the thick file I had compiled. "This includes over $7,000 in rent payments for her sister, $5,500 to her sister's divorce attorney, and multiple direct deposits to her parents during times they themselves reported financial hardship." The judge reviewed the documents quietly, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. "So, the defendant wasn't receiving support from the plaintiffs, but was, in fact, giving it?" "That is correct, Your Honor," Sarah said. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That money isn't relevant," she argued, her voice rising slightly. "We're talking about the cost of raising her. The food, the shelter, the emotional guidance. And why, exactly, the judge interrupted, his gaze sharp. Do you need $350,000 now? My mother hesitated. She glanced at Isabella. To help Isabella pay off the mortgage on her new house, she said softly, the words sounding absurd even to her own ears in the silence of the court. A ripple of discomfort went through her own supporters. Even Uncle Mike shifted uncomfortably. Behind her. The judge then turned his attention to my sister. Ms. Vance, he said, and I realized he was talking to Isabella. Do you believe your sister should be legally and financially responsible for your home loan? Isabella finally looked up, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. She's not married, she said, as if this was a trump card. She doesn't have children. Ido. And that creates a financial obligation on her part, the judge asked, one eyebrow arching slightly. We're family, she insisted weakly. The judge leaned back in his chair. I'm not married either, Ms. Vance. Does that mean I should be paying for my court clerk's rent? Or my bailiff's children's tuition? Isabella blinked. She had no answer. The judge turned back to my parents. Did you financially support Eleonora after she became a legal adult? We were helping Isabella, my father repeated, his voice now sounding like a broken record. So, you prioritized one daughter over the other, the judge stated. He didn't say it as an accusation. He said it as a plain, simple fact. They didn't answer. For the next hour, he dismantled their case with hard, unflinching questions. Why did they assume I would pay? Why purchase a house they knew their other daughter couldn't afford? Why did they feel entitled to tie their help to guilt, and that guilt to a non-existent debt? They gave the kind of hollow, circular answers that collapse under their own weight. When we finally stepped outside into the bright sunlight, Grandma Margaret hugged me first. You were steady, she said. And that's more than I can say for anyone else in that room. I wasn't sure if I'd won. Not yet. But for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't the one on trial. My life was. And it had held up under scrutiny. The verdict came 1 week later. The courtroom felt smaller the second time around, less intimidating. Maybe because I was finally able to breathe in it. The judge didn't waste any words. He looked directly at my parents. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, I find the plaintiff's claim to be entirely without legal or factual merit. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, the financial and emotional responsibility of raising a child does not, under any circumstances, entitle you to reimbursement once that child becomes an adult. He glanced down at his notes, then looked back up, his gaze hardening. In fact, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that your daughter, Ms. Eleonora Vance, has already provided significant and repeated financial support to both of you and her sister, asking for nothing in return. Then, he delivered the final blow, his voice quiet but not soft. Frankly, I find your behavior toward your daughter to be both brazen and profoundly disappointing. Case dismissed. Just like that. It was over. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just stood there, a strange sense of calm washing over me, as Sarah smiled, Grandma Margaret squeezed my arm, and Grandpa Arthur whispered, "You're free." I thought it was truly over then. I thought they would finally leave me alone. It wasn't a week later, I got a call from my grandmother. "Your mother came by the house yesterday," she said, her voice heavy with fatigue. "She asked us to release her inheritance to her early." I sat down on my couch, my heart sinking. "For what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "To pay off Isabella's mortgage," she confirmed. "What did you say?" I told her that we haven't decided who gets what yet. That the will is ours to manage, not hers to demand. "Did she get angry?" I asked. "No," Grandma said, and this was the part that hurt the most. She cried. She begged us not to disinherit her. I didn't know what was worse, that she had the audacity to ask, or that the only thing that could finally bring her to tears was the fear of losing money, not the reality of having lost her daughter. Months passed. Quiet, peaceful months. I finally closed on a small house of my own, nothing grand, but it was mine. I spent weekends painting the kitchen a cheerful, buttery yellow, planting tomato vines in the backyard, and I adopted a solemn, marble-gray cat who slept curled up beside my laptop every night. I heard through my grandmother that Isabella had been forced to rent out the beautiful house my parents had bought for her, and had moved back in with them, along with her 2 boys. My mother was now a full-time babysitter while Isabella worked. Somehow, they were making it work. I didn't call. I didn't write. I built my wall of silence and cherished the peace it gave me. Then, almost a full year after the trial, an email landed in my inbox. There was no subject line. Just a short, stunningly audacious message. "We heard you bought a house. Since you now have extra space, we think it would be for the best if Isabella and the boys moved in with you. It would be much more convenient for them there, and better for the boys to have their own rooms. Let us know when they can move in. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it twice, my mind reeling at the sheer, unmitigated gall. But this time, I didn't get angry. I felt nothing but a distant, cold clarity. I hit reply and typed out a short, simple response. I will not be hosting Isabella or the boys. If you contact me again with these kinds of demands, I will report the harassment to the police. Do not email me again. Then I hit send, blocked their email address, and went to make myself a cup of tea. These days, my house smells like fresh basil and strong coffee. The cat, whom I named Marble, sits on the windowsill most mornings, watching birds he will never chase. The kitchen is yellow, just like I always said I wanted, and the tomato plants out back are finally, miraculously, producing fruit. It's quiet here. There are no voices raised in anger, no manipulative questions I don't want to answer. My grandparents visit often. They bring pie or old newspaper clippings they think I'll find interesting. Grandpa helps me with the gutters. And Grandma still reminds me to lock my windows at night, even though I have a state-of-the-art security system. They don't talk about my parents unless I ask. And I rarely do. One Sunday, as we sat on the porch swing-eyed installed, Grandma said, "Your mother is still talking about you, you know. Still telling people at family gatherings that you abandoned Isabella in her time of need." I didn't answer. I just watched a bee buzz around my tomato plants. "Your Aunt Susan finally told her to stop bringing it up," she added. Said no one wants to hear it anymore. That part, I admit, made me smile. I'm not naive. I know that in their minds, I will always be the one who failed some unspoken test of loyalty. I will always be the one who should have laid down everything I had built for myself at the altar of their expectations. But I also know this, I sleep better now. I'm dating someone. His name is Daniel, and he is kind, with a laugh that feels like space being made just for you. He hasn't asked about my family. Not yet. And I don't offer the story. Some wounds don't need explaining. Some ties don't need mending. Every once in a while, I feel a faint ache, a ghost of what could have been. If they had ever seen me as more than just spare parts for my sister's life. If their love hadn't come with such damning fine print. But I don't regret saying no. Not for a second. Because peace, I've finally learned, isn't something that's freely given to you. It's something you have to be willing to fight for. And sometimes, the fighting looks a lot like walking away.